The media, welcome to the PBP Opposition Leader Press Conference. With me, as usual, is the Opposition Leader. We'll be making statement, after which we'll be taking questions. Come on, Bharrat.
Right. Well, thank you for coming. I think, as most of you would recognize, that there have been quite a few issues in the media. And as I often do, I do not respond to, on a daily basis, to many of the issues that come up and are in the news. People call me, many of the reporters, and sometimes I'd say I deal with it at my press conference. So I hope that you can ask as many issues as you want and today, and on the things that you call me for. Some of the reporters who are in here would know what those issues are. So I'm going to, first of all, share my impression of what's happening in the country. And this is by no stretch of the imagination anything new. We continue on this rudderless drift in economic policy making. Our country has seen a spate of criminal activities that have led to great insecurity among many people, and this is confronted by denial from the government and comparisons with the period that the PBP has been in office rather than by solutions. We have seen the government wandering in a desultory manner, again in policy making, in a whole range of issues in the social sector, in matters that they told us were their priorities, but yet we have no clarity on many of those issues. So this must have consequences for our country and many people. And the consequences are devastating on people's lives and their livelihoods. And somehow the government does not seem to recognize this. If you talk to the small loggers from Aichuni or Kwakwani or Linden, you will understand that the dire situation that they're in, and that this government at the central level here in Georgetown seems either unaware, oblivious of their concerns, or unsympathetic to their concerns. It's busy pursuing what it calls the green economy, but even that is undefined up to now. And if you talk to people in construction, you will find that most of them now have had to park their equipment, and many of their staff have been laid off because they can't find work. Government expenditure has fallen short. Many projects are not being implemented because of incompetence and lack of clarity, again, by the government officials, senior political operatives of the government, or their involvement, interference in the operation of projects because they want to steer the projects to people who are sympathetic to them. So a lot of people, the contractors have laid off staff, and many of those people are out there looking for work now. We have seen Barama laying off a number of people. Retail trade people are losing their jobs in that too. And the government continues to speak about the good life for all Guyanese. And so we've seen the president, this brings me to the president and the prime minister. They're abroad And there, the president has gone to Morocco to talk about the green economy and Guyana's contribution to the Paris Agreement. Now, the Paris Agreement was negotiated, it was signed. Our pledges, both conditional and unconditional pledges, which were not discussed with the country before they were made, are known to everyone. We now need to set about implementing many of the measures that we have pledged. But we've seen the president speak about the green economy again, and he said in Guyana, in Guyana, we're yet to get a single document which tells us what the green economy is. He has criticized the LCDS as being too narrow, but at least we have a few hundred pages of definition of our approach to a green economy, how we will transition from high carbon initiatives to a low carbon future without affecting prosperity, the policies we're going to implement, the projects that we have to put in place and that we're going to fund. All of that is defined. The green economy, from what I've heard from the grapevine, is they have asked UNDP to help. But if anything, I think the most truthful position that we have seen has come from one Miss Series, when she said, I'm going to quote her, she said, the Green Plan is the developmental plan that is intended to guide the development of the country over the next few years, maybe 10 years or so. What we are seeking to do now is to ensure that we have a roadmap or framework in place that will guide the development of this plan starting next year. The team expects that by January 2017, there will be this framework in place. What it entails is the coalescing of the existing policies, plans, and programs to see where we are. Essentially, a gap analysis. This will then determine how we move forward. What she's saying is that they are now assessing what's there. They're going to do a gap analysis. And that gap, the results of the gap analysis will be available in January. And then they will decide what to do, what else to do. I can tell them today, we don't need a gap analysis. I can do a 2 hours presentation or get one of the persons working with me that would give them exactly where we are now. So they're going to wait until January 2017 to complete this gap analysis and then decide what else to do. So it seems as though the president in his public posture has repudiated the LCDS as being too narrowly focused, and yet they're going to examine these policies to see what they need to build on. Now, I'm happy if that's the idea, to build on our existing base. But they need to come clean with the country and move on it. So far, it's just statements from the president that mean very little. He said in Marrakesh that we have to implement renewable energy, and we promised 100% renewable energy by 2025 in our pledge to the Paris Agreement. Now we're in 2016, on 2017 soon. How do we get to 100% renewable energy by 2025? When we're not going to build the hydro, which would have given us about 94-95% of our renewable electricity, or electricity demand rather. They're going to do some small wind farm. That's tiny, and that would be probably, I'll talk a bit about that, but it will not meet our requirements. But there's nothing else on the horizon. No other plan. And then, how are they going to ensure that, if you look at the broader definition of renewable energy, there'll be a conversion of vehicles from using fossil fuel to using renewable energy, ethanol, etc. We haven't even started doing that. Means a whole range of things. Infrastructure has to be built. It has to be sourced. Or where are we going to produce the ethanol? You have to put in new gas stations. The cars have to all be converted. Is that possible? And they pledge that. So that's if you look at the broader definition of renewable energy. If you look at it narrowly, just electricity, they're still not on a pathway to doing this. And so my big concern is we're going to ask for more money in Marrakesh, and we should always fight for more as the bloc of developing countries. But we're sitting on a ton of resources that we have left them in the Norwegian arrangement, and the money is only being utilized in some ways, like the Amerindian resources, but in a very partisan manner. So part of the resources would have been for electrification in Amerindian communities. We bought the 6,000 solar panels, and the government, to complete the riverine, and not just Amerindian communities, but riverine communities too, hinterland and riverine communities, because you have other races that live along the river. We gave out 13,000 panels. 6,000 were bought before the elections to complete the task, and they have decided now to take those 6,000 panels and use it at the office of the president and the the president's residence. So LCDS money now being used for the office of the president and the prime minister's residence. The computers, the 10,000 computers that we got from China, that China gave us before the elections, are now in Guyana. But 2,000 of those were supposed to go to the hinterland. Again, those were taken away. A lot of those are LCDS projects. So we see where the country is going. It's drifting. It's drifting in terms of this so-called green state that we are going to be building. Secondly, on the economy itself, I've noticed something pretty unusual. Well, I shouldn't say unusual. At some point, there is quite a bit of confusion, and I think this is deliberately peddled by the government when it relates to the economy. At one time you hear them saying, we are in a crisis, growth rate is slowing down, the economy is deteriorating, some individuals in government, and then at other times you hear them say, we're doing extremely well. In some cases, we are doing better, we are spending more on people, etc. And in other cases, the PPP has not left us enough resources to continue. But in all of these issues, it's hard to come to the truth, because they do have the same ambiguity, or maybe strategy is being carried out by some newspapers sympathetic to the government. Take, for example, Kaichor News. So today's Kaichor News correctly says that between 2005 to 2013, the economy grew by 4.7%. In 2014 by 3.8%, and 2015 by 3%. So that's a slowdown. But on Monday, the Kaichor News spoke about the economy was heating up at a GDP growth rate of 4.4% between 2015 and 2012 and 2015. Notice the word, that it was so corrupt and the economy was heating up. We had too much growth rate in that period. It was heating up. And that the APNU, well, they inherited an economic disaster. So today is accurate. They did not, today's Kaichor News is accurate. They did not inherit an economic disaster. As was pointed out, between 2005 to 2013, we had an average growth rate of 4.7%, the highest in the region. So that's not an economic disaster. 10 years of continuous growth. But if you look at many, many stories there, oh, it is an economic disaster that they had it. Let me give you another example of this. We left $2.3 billion at GRDB. Nobody would know that. The president spoke about, oh, there was no money in the Petro-Caribbean fund. But the Petro-Caribbean resources were going to pay the farmers as it came in. It went out to pay the farmers. And then we will cancel the debt instrument as Jordan has been doing. So you would see that the stock of debt has moved down from 51% of GDP to 48% of GDP because he's canceled some of the promissory notes, etc. Not because of anything new they've done. But that's normal. We saw Jordan then say $23 billion of subsidy for the rice industry in his first budget, and the president saying in his speech about them putting $4 billion into subsidy for rice, but we can't trace this in the accounts, the national accounts. The $23 billion was just a pass-through arrangement from the Petro-Caribbean deal. So it's all fancy footworks. The $4 billion we can't find. But forget all of that. The GRDB account in 2015 had $2.3 billion sitting in that account. Today they have $1.1 billion now sitting there. Someone needs to ask what they've spent their money on, the $1.2 billion, the 2.3 from 2.3 to 1.1. What they've spent the $1.2 billion on so far. So flush with money there. I gather, further to what we're hearing, they've now decided to spend about $150 million to grow rice at Wales. So GRDB is going to take money that rightfully should be helping the rice farmers that came out of small levies, etc., that accumulated in GRDB, now would go to fund the Wales project to grow rice. But there is absolutely no transparency about the spending there. But you would believe that they had no money there. And we have pointed out also that they had $8 billion in the account at CHPA. $8 billion we left them there with. They have finished the audit of the account. Remember, this was supposed to be a slush fund. They promised to transfer these resources. The money, what is happening with this money? What's happening with money from GGMC, NFMU, the Guyana Forestry Commission? And by the way, the last time I came here and had a press conference, some Slavic News, Kaichor News reporters, I saw the next day Kaichor News accused me of muzzling the reporters. And I must say that there were two reporters. And the first reporter asked 5 questions that I answered. And then I said to the second reporter, wait until I've completed the questions from the other media houses and I'll come back to you. And she walked out of the meeting, not the meeting, but the press conference, and said that. The next day also they had a story that I lied, that I said that Jordan had not transfer all the money from the lotto funds to the consolidated funds. And Jordan had done that. Until now, the money from the lotto funds, hundreds of millions of dollars, have not been transferred to the consolidated fund. So again, that story was inaccurate the following day. But they have these pools of money. That's what I'm coming back to. So the newspapers have to make up their mind. If they want an analysis of what we actually left, ask us for this. But one day you can't say we left a country that is flourishing, as evidenced by the growth rate, a country with its low indebtedness, as evidenced by the stock of debt to GDP, and the low servicing of the debt, the ratio of servicing of the debt, and then 2 days later accuse us of leaving an economic disaster. We're prepared to deal with this. We're prepared to address those issues in greater detail. How much money was left in the central bank? How much was left as projects negotiated? For example, the money for the hospital, for the ferry, for the West Bank, the Morara Road. All of these resources are there. The Indian line of credit, Chinese line of credit, they're huge, the Citizen Security Program. All of these were projects that were left that are being implemented now. So I would hope that anytime you, particularly some of the media houses, when you make these broad statements, I've seen a lot of them come out of the editorials, and I suspect it's written by different people who are sympathetic to APNU and stuff. They make a political case. But much of what they say about the economy cannot be substantiated by technical arguments or an examination of the statistics. I've seen GECOM also making the news. And we have indicated already that we are prepared to talk to the government about GECOM. But it seems as though there is, it's happening in many cases. And I think the main perpetrator of this is Clive Thomas. As head of SARU, he has come out, even without investigations completed or even initiated, come out and give interviews about their intention to lock people up, etc. Basically political positions. Secondly, he's been doing this on GECOM to present the company as a basket case. Now today, I'm not going to take you down a long road, because I've asked some of our MPs, particularly those responsible for agriculture, to respond in great detail on this matter. But if you examine some articles published by Clive Thomas in 2014, you will see that his positions today are exactly those that he made public in 2014. He came into that job with preconceived ideas. I don't know if it's a function of chronological maturity, but that you can't be flexible to new solutions. But he came into the office with those views. And those are the exact things that he's saying here today. And I would urge you to read what he has said. Now, most of the people they have rehired are failures and never manage a successful business in their life. Some of the people on the board never manage a successful business. We are putting the future of this industry in the hands of a few people who are incompetent at best. incompetent at best. So we've seen differences of views. Right? One week, Tony Vera says something. In fact, a few weeks ago, he wrote saying that it would be disastrous to close any part of this industry, and pointed out that the levy that they collected from the industry, the government collected from the industry for 20 years, from 1976 to 1996, was enormous, some 200 and something million dollars, about over 230 million US dollars. I had shown that from Greenidge's letter, when he said, not his letter, but his affidavit for the green mining construction, when he said they had spent $200 million on bauxite in the 80s, what that figure will be in current dollars, into 2016 dollars. And it worked out to about $1.5 billion. Similarly, if you look at the time value of money, bring the value of the levy, $51 collected in 1976, to today's dollars, looking at a discount rate of 7-8%, it runs you into over $2 billion US dollars of contribution of sugar directly. Forget the employment and GDP and everything else. Direct contribution to the treasury. The European Union money too, he said we spent it on Hope Canal and stuff. It's not true. The Hope Canal was done from the Venezuelan loan, part of it, and part from our own resources. But those resources were spent on the rest of the country. If we look at the two alone, that's more than the entire debt of GECOM that GECOM has. And I've also pointed out that GECOM's debt, a substantial part of the debt, are to government agencies, including GRA. And if we can write off $10 billion for DDL directly, I'm not speaking about the implications for the Treasury, because when others claim their refund. But if we can write off that sum to DDL, why can't we write it off for GECOM? There are solutions to this. To say this is the same government, Nagamoto and Clive Thomas and the others, that boasted when they got into office the first 6 months, how Skeldon factory was performing as it never performed before. They boasted about how wonderful this factory was performing. And now we've seen this report which says the thing is being run down. There's no maintenance. Of course, if there's no maintenance, there'll be problems. But these are the same guys. And then they asked, how did we choose the Chinese to? We went to a public tender for the factory. There were two bids from the Indian group and the Chinese group. There was a team set up to evaluate the bids, not politicians. And they recommended that we go with the Chinese company. We then hired a Booker T team to be the project managers. And they were supposed to do some designs as well as to oversee the design that the Chinese did and oversee the construction of the factory to make sure that the quality was done to a certain level. That was, we hired an international company to oversee the construction. Errol Hanuman, who is the head of GECOM now, was the representative of that group. He sat on the board of GECOM in that period. We then sued Booker T because we claim that they had approved money. The CEO had approved money to pay the project management group, and that they were related parties when the project management group did not do the work they're supposed to do. And we named specifically the pond dumper that they helped design, that came from Miami, that did not fulfill its specs and the role that it was supposed to play in the factory. So today, Harold Hanuman still manages the company, GECOM, but we are told about all of these mistakes were made. But it was not done by politicians. We hired the best technical people. Booker Tate was considered the best technical people to oversee the factory. And it was this government that said that it had gotten the factory to work wonderfully because PPP was mismanaging it the first 6 months. How can you change from you did so well in the first 6 months to now blaming us for this disaster? It is the inconsistency, but as someone said, as most people recognize, this is all about preparing the company for sale and closure. All of these public positions. And talking about money being diverted from, other economic activities to GECOM. It's a small part of GDP when you look at the subsidies so far. Tiny part of GDP. But GECOM sugar production is about 15% of gross domestic product itself. Just imagine that being withdrawn from the economy. You will have economic turmoil. It will have huge consequences for the economy and for our macro position, macro stability. And I saw GECOM asked for $600 million because they said GECOM had helped out with drainage and irrigation in other areas. But just imagine how much money we'd still have to spend if GECOM was not maintaining those canals, etc., which are critical to flood water control, water management, flood control, etc. So this cannot be looked at just like this. If we had taken a position when we got into office that, Linden subsidy, in those days, when the economy was $300 million US, now it's about $3 billion, and the debt servicing was high, we could have easily said, we don't want to subsidize electricity in Linden and the other places because it's too much on the treasury. Let's end it because it's diverting money from other expenditure badly needed in social sectors and everything else when all the roads in the country were in a disaster. Let's stop doing it. But we did not because people mattered. And so this government has to stop being so partisan about the sugar industry. Stop getting these advocates of closure and privatization to go on TV and in the newspapers and make a case using emotional factors, trying to say to people, we could do better if we close the industry. We have more money to spend on other things. Well, that's all nonsensical. Because if you don't have the workers working, you're not going to get the taxes, you're not going to get the revenue, a whole range of activities. It will shrink economic activities in the country. I believe also that if we close wheels, which the government seems to be heading to do, that the people on the entire West Bank, they must get the same treatment as a depressed community would get. Remember the early term that we had. Like Linden, they must pay the same rate for electricity and water that people in Region 10 pay. That the entire West Bank must get the same sort of help. Because if we're going to treat people equally in Guyana, then they should also have equal access to help from the government. But as I said before, we will deal with this. Let me say for the record, we are opposed to the meter contract for the city. We're opposed to it, period. And we're very, very disappointed that the government used our day when we were supposed to debate this contract to put the president's speech without any major notice 1 day ahead to debate the president's speech. So we could not debate the motion that we put into the parliament in relation to the contract for putting in meters in the city. We believe that they needed the time so that they can conclude all of the details, the details necessary to give us a fait accompli, so that by the time we get to the parliament on the 21st of November, that we will be faced with a fait accompli. And that even if we pass a motion, we get support for a motion which says that they don't support the metering contract and the government should intervene in it, then it would be already a done deal. We believe that that was there. We're also opposed to the withdrawing of firearms from private people who have licensed firearms. We are opposed to it totally once the firearms are used for lawful purposes. So we've seen all sorts of explanations about the reason for crime. We have seen the comparisons. The president has a new mantra now about the periods of the troubles, when we had problems in Buxton, etc. And I've seen some people trying to compare the two periods. We have pointed out that the difference between crime now and crime then. And we have shown that the numerous documented cases where crime at that time, that we were faced with an insurgency, that there was a political motive, that these criminals who wreaked havoc on our country, they were seen as freedom fighters. We are fighting two motives there, not just a pure criminal motive, but also a political group that got cover from many senior people in the government and in PNC at that time, who spoke about these freedom fighters in glowing terms. Very big difference, huge difference. And we were also faced with, now in retrospect, a few people who headed the army at that time and the police force, who now, based on recent actions, may lead me to believe that they never wanted, given there was a political dimension to this crime, never really wanted us to bring a resolution to the criminal activities. So there is a huge difference. But it's not about comparison of statistics. It's never about that. It's about addressing the daily spate of criminal activities today. It's about your government pledging to people before you took office that you had a plan that would see the crime rate go down, and it has spiral escalated in your tenure. And the explanations that you have given are sometimes, they defy logic, they don't make sense. And your solutions are found lacking. Withdrawing weapons from private individuals because they may be renting out their guns. Shutting business premises at 2 a.m. in the morning, bringing more horses and dogs to fight criminals. These are not things that will make a huge impact. If you have a whole suite of other measures that we had put in place through several projects, may make an impact as a whole, but not those things. And that seems to be the explanation we're getting. And then the president retreating from his earlier position. At one stage he said, no way. He wrote about this extensively when he was in opposition. And then even when he became president, that the army must not fight crime, criticizing us. And now he has come around. I don't have a problem with that because we support it. We support the army engaged in with the police in fighting crime. So I'm just saying that it's duplicitous. The same things that he criticized us for, he's now in desperation had to turn around and deal with this. On budget, let me just say that I'm very, very disappointed about the report that came out from the Auditor General, and not disappointed about the report, but the reaction to the report. We were criticized for many years as being in violation of the FMAA. And the government pledged that as soon as it took office, it's going to sort out all of these issues. In fact, they're going to charge people who violated the FMAA, etc. We are still waiting for that to happen. We would like them to pursue people who have, according to them, violated the FMAA. But let me say, Section 43 of the FMAA states, except as otherwise provided in this Act or in any other law, at the end of each fiscal year, any unexpended balance of public monies issued out of the consolidated fund shall be returned and surrendered to the consolidated fund. So we were very surprised that after the Minister of Finance came to the Parliament earlier this year to present the 2016 budget, that the figures that he gave us had money that were in checks. These were checks on hand, many that were issued in violation of this Act just days before the deadline and held by permanent secretaries and regional executive officers. In the Ministry of Public Health, $1.2 billion was held in checks. So there is no way, and it's a huge amount. Just in that ministry alone, it was 1.2. So billions of dollars. So you can understand, the law says at the end of the year, 31st of December, all unexpended balances have to be returned. But these guys now cut the checks. They hold the checks for works that have not been done as yet. And then in January, February, March, April, they just hand this out. Now, assuming the contractor doesn't do the work, but he could receive the check, the permanent secretary could easily hand the check over for $100 million because it is not done on the basis of measured work. The checks are not processed. So let me tell you how you process a check. You have measured works, then the request for payment comes in, it's verified, then a check is cut. In this case, a check is cut for the full project sum, the balance, maybe if a project is halfway completed. And so it's not cut against measured work or completed work, future work. So just assuming he doesn't do the work and the check is handed to him, we have no means of following up. And billions of dollars were cut in the last budget. So this is a grave violation of the law. And I think these accounting officers have to be told that if they do this now or in the future, they're going to face consequences. because it can only be done with the complicity of the accounting officers. Secondly, that we have a budget that will be presented on the 28th. So the figures that will come to us for 2016 will be best estimates. So they will have hopefully actual expenditures up to the 28th of November. Well, maybe not the 28th of November, but the 20th, when just before they go to print. An estimate of what is to be spent between the 20th of November, or whenever they decide, to the 31st of December. This now leaves the room for greater abuse. And I think this is one of the reasons why they're bringing an early budget. We'll have almost a month or two of basically the government being able to do what it wants. Because it would have come to Parliament with a figure, but that figure would have projections in the figure. Unlike in the past, when the latest, if you come in February, you will actually go to the closed accounts because the accounts close on the 31st of December. So when you come to Parliament, the parliamentarians will now have figures that were actually expended. So now in 2016, we will now have figures that would involve projections to year end. Projections on revenue, projections on expenditure. So we will never know. Imagine I could be arguing about a shortfall in revenue, and then in December you have a surge in revenue. Or I could be praising the government for meeting all of the fiscal criteria, saying a good meeting the target on fiscal deficit. And then in December, you have a huge expenditure or a revenue position that falls short of what was projected for December. And you have a bigger deficit. So I will never be able to debate that in the Parliament because I simply wouldn't know. The minister has a lot of say over this now because based on his projections. And their ability to project is questionable. Questionable too. So we have to look out for all of these, the positives about this coming with an early budget. They've spun this as, once in a lifetime deal. There's nothing unique about this early budget. Nothing unique. It just puts us in a more difficult position because we're not going to have actual figures. You're going to have projections for the previous year. So the best estimates would involve projections. Puts us at a severe disadvantage to scrutinize the budget the way it should be and the numbers. So I hope that be looked at a little bit more by the media. I've received a number of calls, and I think it's necessary that I say something before you ask me about it, about some Facebook comments made by one of our members of Parliament, Nigel Dharamlal, about the President. I've looked at the comments and I find them unacceptable. In fact, reprehensible. I believe I've been critical of the President and his policies. The government has been, the opposition has been. In the past, we have criticized each other, but it should never get personal. It should never get personal. And I want to ask all of those who say they're supportive of the People's Progressive Party, online and everywhere else, that I want to say to them today that we can intelligently address every single issue, every single accusation of corruption, every accusation of mismanagement or discrimination, we can deal with in an intelligent manner. We can deal with the venality that is happening now in this government, the proneness of this government to be corrupt. We can deal with their duplicity, their incompetence, using language that is not hateful or personal. And so I would urge everyone, and I've spoken to Mr. Dharmlal. He said to me that he recognized that the language was not befitting a member of parliament or anyone for that matter, that he apologized for it, and he has to everyone. He put up a post on his Facebook page, and he has expressed contrition to me too, that that there be no repetition of this sort of issue. Maybe I'd end there. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And there you had a number of issues were pronounced on. Now we'll have questions. Who will be the first? State your name and the media house you come from.
It was the fantastic amount of money demanded by GECOM, 18 billion by the end of this year, 21 billion next year, and growing. When do you recommend that the government calls a halt to such funneling of money to an entity like that?
First of all, it's going to get worse if you continue to mismanage the place. The people that they claim mismanage under the PVP, they brought them back. There is no focus on getting GECOM efficient now. So it's under Clive Thomas's watch that the place is making a bigger loss than in the past. So if the annual loss keeps growing, who takes responsibility for that? It's their tenure in office now. I thought they can fix this. All right, the debt is past money that we spent. Okay, the debt is past money, even assuming that that was not spent properly. But you have the situation to manage. You can stop the hemorrhaging now because you are the efficient APNU government doing a better job than the PPP. You can stop the hemorrhaging of the annual losses. What plan do they have? Have they told us to ensure that they stop the hemorrhaging of the annual losses? What plan? And so my point is that if you look at it in a static way, then the numbers will keep mounting. But it's like, why don't they, maybe they should focus on people who actually can manage things. Get rid of this board, get rid of the existing management, maybe bring in, if we believe that the Tate and Lyle group made a big difference in the past, let's give them another management contract. Those sorts of things can be done. Consolidate the debt, write off some of the debt that's to government agencies. Put maybe a period. Say we will spend X amount of money over a period to bring it to a certain state. There is no goal. The entire goal about making sugar more efficient, doing the things that are necessary. The entire conversation has been about closure and divestment, not about efficiency. And so there are lots of things that you can do or you can explore. They're not exploring any of these things except in closure. And that's why we believe all of this political talk is preparing the ground for the closure. And then throwing these figures to make the citizens feel, we're putting too much money into GECOM now. and money coming out from our pocket, basically. I saw they said the IMF is unhappy, but we don't have an IMF program. Now, we work our way out of the IMF program. There is no IMF program in Guyana. What we have is an Article 4 consultation, which they do for every country. So there was a time when we had limitations with the IMF, and so we could not, say for example, many things couldn't be done, like because there was a cap on the level of public expenditure. It's very interesting now that most countries are talking about, including Trump and the others, about fiscal stimulus. Everyone is talking about. We're talking about shrinking our economy, contractionary policies, when the world is talking about stimulating economic growth. Unbelievable. Yes.
Outside of the domestic context of sugar as it relates to production and bailouts and so on, what really is the international context of sugar at this point in time? And what are the markets saying? Is there a market for sugar out there?
I believe there is a market for sugar. I believe we'd have all the things that we try to do, we can do and keep sugar alive. So let me give you an example of the attempts to diversify sugar into specialty sugar, at one stage a distillery. You'd recall we went to public tender for a distillery in privately owned distillery in Berbice at Skeldon. And the government decided, well, there were several bids. The best bid came from Trinidad Company. I think it was Angostura. We awarded the contract. DDL went to court to say that they will not get enough molasses from Gaisuco. And they blocked that project for about almost 10 years. It went through the courts, it got stalled in the courts. We had an investor went out of public tender to get a distillery, and we got it blocked in the court. We moved to packaged sugar. That's why we did the packaging plant here at Enmore, because I believe packaged sugar, has a great, and with good marketing, has a great future. But diversification into things that failed in the past. Why are you going to grow more rice? When this government, when it came into office, you know what it said? That the PPP was irresponsible. It said to the farmers, grow more rice without ensuring there were adequate markets for rice. Now the government wants to get into growing rice. I saw some investors, some people came from Brazil. And let me tell you, we've had discussions with all of those people. And the same, I hope that Sydney Alicock, the vice president, that they and I and the surrounding areas will raise the same sorts of objection about large tracts, large mega farms, and their impact through the use of pesticides and other things on the water resources, because they were complaining about that. And you recall when I said we are going to do it with the Caribbean. Well, one project came in, the Santa Fe, started, and we had some other interests, but we had to be very careful about who we gave the land to, because of issues with the border, and secondly, because most of them wanted to grow seed paddy on our side to export back into Brazil. And we wrote the federal government, because the federal government we had on the trade agreement we had, there was a limit to the amount of paddy that could be exported into Brazil. And so we asked the federal government to ensure that if the inspectors can come to the Guyana side and certify that these seeds were grown to international standards because they're hybrid seeds, high-yielding hybrid seeds. Then if they can allow it to go back into Brazil, to be re-exported into Brazil. So we never got any word about that. And I suspect, because there is a history to all of these things that they talk about, these mega projects in the interior. We had 5 or 6, as I said before, 5 or 6 proposals, big proposals. One to do palm oil in the savannas, because we did not want to do palm oil in the forest. It meant you had to cut the trees. So this would have meant adding biomass to the savannas. Secondly, there's a Chinese project to grow the trees, the acacia and the other fast-growing species. They already were here doing nurseries, etc., to grow that to do paper pulp. So they will grow the trees, not cut our existing trees, and then in a rotation system. We had proposals for mixed farm. We had for soya bean, for cattle rearing, for rice growing, dry rice growing. All of those, they can easily dust them out. But we also were very careful about the fragile savanna ecosystem, because water and, it's dry. So you can have major erosion and all sorts of things there. So you have to be extremely careful. But we went through this whole thing too. On the hydro, we had started the discussions with the Brazilians again. In the first budget, I saw Jordan said they will continue those discussions. That seems to drop off the radar now, after they're going with their in a corrupt act, going for this wind farm project. I'm waiting to see how they will treat it in the budget. And by the way, now we're talking about electricity. This spate of blackout is unbelievable. I get calls from people all over the country. It's unbelievable. Especially, I know we struggled through periods when we didn't have money to put into GPL. We didn't have money. These guys have racked up probably about $13-14 billion sitting in an account, GPL account. About 14 billion, because they did not address fully the price when the fuel prices came up. They didn't adjust downwards the price to consumers. They've racked up a huge sum of money. Ask them about it. So money is not the issue now, but it's competence again on that matter.
Marcel.
Myself, Thomas Savage. Sir, your position on the proposed, government's proposed bill for Prime Minister, former Prime Minister Hamilton Green's benefits. We haven't heard from you specifically, or the PDP. You've heard from former Attorney General Alexander. What are your views? Are you going to support it? And I need your help wherever you can here, because I know the GECOM Commissioner has signaled that he is going to retire, and there has to be a replacement. Where do you fall in this process? Because I think you're supposed to submit a list of names and stuff.
Yeah, sure.
What's with that process, and how is it going to get started?
Well, yes, Mr. Serge Bali is leaving. And according to the Constitution, I have to submit a list of six names from which the President will choose the next head of GECOM. We have started looking at the names of the people that we will submit to replace Mr. Serge Bali. I had expected that by now, since Mr. Serge Bali had signaled months ago to the President, and more formally recently, that he will be departing, that the President would initiate the process that will trigger that constitutional provision for the replacement of the head of GECOM. given the necessity of having a fully comprised commission at all points in time. And the work of the commission is critical in the preparation for the next elections. So I have not received any indication from the president when he intends to trigger that provision. Now, this is very worrying for us, given the sloth in this government, its incompetence, and the sensitivity surrounding GECOM. We're suspicious that there may be a lengthy delay in that entire process. So I've asked the Chief Whip to write on my behalf to the Office of the President, the head of the Presidential Secretariat, to say to the head of the President, point out this issue to the head of the Presidential Secretariat and inquire of him when does the President intend to trigger the movement to get the replacement of the chairman of GECOM. So that letter will be sent shortly. Hamilton Green. Interesting. Almost deja vu. I recall the entire period running up to the elections, both 2011 and 2015, where my pension was a central issue in pointing out, or as evidence of a corrupt PPP, that my pension was supposed to be evidence of us being corrupt. Nagamotu and Ramjatan almost every single week spoke about this issue in Berbice on the television. Other members of the opposition at that time from APNU, they also made a big issue of it. So, viewed in that context, let us examine what happened. Because I said now, people may be willing a little bit more to listen to us. Prior to the passage of that bill in Parliament, presidents got their pension, 7/8 of their salary. They got security, utilities paid, health care paid for, a whole range of benefits. Former presidents got that. But all of these issues or these benefits were conferred on presidents by cabinet decisions in the past. And they were a charge on the consolidated fund. So I said that if the presidents sit in cabinets and they decide on their own benefits, and then these benefits are charged on the consolidated fund, it may not be purely legal. So we needed a law to govern this. A law, so for the first time ever in Guyana's history, we then had a law drafted, which went, or a bill drafted, that went to the parliament and the country saw. Because it was not as though the benefits were not there before. They then saw what presidents would got. There were some minor things like getting help for their offices and stuff, some additional. But at least the country saw for the first time. And the opposition and the entire parliament had an opportunity to debate it, to have a say in what presidents got. I thought that we should be lauded for making something more transparent. But the whole issue became about that this was a Jagdeo bill. Although it said former presidents, it was supposed to be for Jagdeo, which is not true. So everything was distorted. They said I was receiving a pension of $3 million a month on the campaign. It's not true. It was 7/8, like everyone else, of the salary. So the elections came, and we now seen that that this bill is not a Jagdeo's bill. It was for former presidents. So Ramatar gets exactly the same benefits I get. Sam Hines get the same benefits. I get the same benefits as provided by the law, and President Granger will get those benefits too. APNU and the others said they couldn't afford those things. It was too much for the country to bear. That Jagdeo took all of these things for himself and now all the presidents. It's too much. It's too costly. So how did they respond to this? The first thing they did, they reduced some of the benefits. And that there's a court case now in relation to that. But they reduced some of the benefits. The next thing they did was to increase their own salaries. So now the Prime Minister gets a salary of $1.7 million a month. So his pension, because he is not head of state or head of government, but he's been a member of parliament for more than 12 years. If you're a member of parliament for 12 years, you get 7/8 of your salary as a pension. So Nagamutu's pension now will be as big as mine. But Nagamutu will get the pension that I will get. And this is after 6 weeks in office. They fixed themselves, not just the salaries, but they fixed the pension for the future, because they knew with this big increase in their salaries that they had, they will now get pensions in the future. So not one, but the vice president's salary move up significantly. So now imagine we'll have to probably pay 7/8 of $1.3 million for vice presidents and stuff like that, their pensions. So suddenly, from not being able to afford for Jagdeo, they cut our benefits and increase benefits for 27 ministers, 3 vice presidents, prime minister, president, when they got into office. And people are just looking at the salaries. They're not looking at all the costs. Yeah, I was looking at how much we spend on Nagamutu a month. It's about $11.2 million a month. This will work out to about $75 million in 5 years for doing nothing, absolutely nothing. Has no portfolio. Running around all the day long, making speeches, irrelevant things. Has no portfolio. As a desk in the office of the president. Has been relegated to a junior minister's position. So this is it. Look at the irony of this all, the duplicity. And now coming back further, that this bill, after having said that it was Jagdeo's bill, but it was not, the former president's bill, coming to bring a bill for an individual who was never head of state, never head of government. Nagamutu is not head of state nor head of government, but he will get a pension almost as big as mine. Never head of state or head of government, because the prime minister is not head of state nor head of government. He's a member of the cabinet, or like any other member. Prime Minister Samuel Hines did not get his pension because he was prime minister for for all these years. He got it because he was a former president. So we now suddenly see this benefit, and I don't understand. So the city council has been giving all these benefits, and they don't see anything wrong with this. By the time when the city is looking for money from the government, Hamilton Green enjoys all these benefits that are way above what I probably would get. And now the government has taken this over. Is this not duplicitous? Aren't they doing exactly what they accused us of, and even worse, more egregious, because they distorted what we did? Aren't they doing this? Isn't this just a rape of the Treasury? A rape of the Treasury. They've settled their pensions long into the future now. Nagamutu can retire tomorrow. So with this huge pension. And the spending on them. So my point is, are we making this specific? What special contribution did Hamilton Green make to Guyana? If they can demonstrate that. There have been cases where I've done stuff. Mrs. Hoyt was not going to get a good pension. So in my tenure, I took a bill to the Parliament to adjust upwards the pension of President Hoyt, and then said that spouses should get 50% of that. So all spouses of former heads of state now will get 50% of the salary of the pension of whoever the head of state is, well, if it's female or male. And so I did that because Mrs. Hoyt would have gotten a small sum of money, and she ended up getting like $500,000 a month. We kept the security for her. We kept paying her light bill and water bill. We didn't treat Mrs. Hoyt the same way that, remember when we got in, every day they were hounding us, even in court now, cutting the benefits like they did. So I don't have a problem with ensuring that people, who've served the country, that they live in a particular way because it's affordable. Now take example, the Pradoville thing, because you saw the arguments. Assuming for a moment that they're absolutely right, and that the cabinet approve a recommendation or a proposal to sell to themselves, some members, land below the market price and thereby enrich itself. And that's true, assuming that's true. Right? So let us take the logic a little bit further. State assets or immovable assets, land, movable assets like furniture, some, etc., and cash assets in the consolidated fund. So assets take different form, but they're all state assets. So how is it not the same issue when a cabinet sits and takes cash assets now, 50% salary for itself, and look at its pension in the future, when in the same period they give the public servants 7%? Then you can see that the cabinet decision, it has enriched itself, because by taking cash assets from the Treasury to improve not only their own salaries but their pensions. Let us calculate how much that will be in the future. It runs into hundreds of millions of dollars for these individuals that they will get. So what's the difference between a cabinet taking cash assets, state assets, for yourself and your pension, and the cabinet in the past, as you've said, taking land which is below market price so enriching itself in doing that. They're all state assets. So are we going to charge these people now? Shouldn't we file criminal charges against them for doing exactly what they claim Prattville did? Because it doesn't matter what assets you're talking about, whether it's cash or land or any other assets, they're all state assets. So have they not stolen state assets too? Adam Harris, it would be interesting to see.
I never get a pension. So
Oh, no, your pension. Interesting to see how you call on the head of SARU the next time he comes to the newspaper for an interview to look at logic, so that even if what they claim about Prattville 2 is true, and it's not true, a lot of the things, but then the same logic should lead to the other.
Next, yes.
But before, Suraj,
Yes.
but, sir, you didn't say if you're going to support or not.
I have to discuss this with our members of parliament. I don't want to take a position at this point in time, but trust me, there will be a big debate. There will be a huge debate, and you'll hear some of these points. And then the Prime Minister, who said he never traveled first class before. You remember on the campaign trail that he never traveled first class before because they could build 4 kilometers of water mains for pipelines in WIM from the first class ticket. Has been traveling a lot in first class now. Lots of first class journeys, and I hear taking not a lot of family members along with him too, which would have been something that the press would have been writing about Adam Harris if we had done it. Family members being paid to go on these trips abroad. And family members getting letters from government agencies looking for deals selling rice now. So family member with a letter saying they're an agent of a particular government agency, and that if you want to tie up a deal with them, you can go through these family members for a percentage. That's happening, and those things will come out a little bit later. They will come out a bit. By the way, I met Gulsaran at the reception, the British reception, and I said to him, we will invite you to a forum that the PPP is holding, so you can talk about the accusations you made in the past. We'd invite the media and everyone. So he was equivocating. So I said, we still want to find out about the 28 billion stolen that per annum in procurement fraud, and about your illogical, well, I shouldn't have said that, his unique form of describing a mile and a whole range of things. So we're still going to have that anti-corruption forum. And by the way, that cover-up that they had, that they call the Commission of Inquiry, the GNBA, that's a cover-up. That's a total unadulterated cover-up of what actually took place. And I'm sure Kaicho News knows that too. It's a cover-up.
Yes. So I have 2 questions. We go back to the Wdenesday. Evidently, there's some problems there. I recall you're on record saying that you have promised to personally engage with Wdenesday and to help turn the industry around. Do you still stand by that promise?
Yes, that was at a particular time, and we did. And there were lots of things that were fixed too. For example, the pond dumper was the big issue, and they had this equivocation, to and froing. So at one stage, having meetings with the people involved to fix discrete problems that they were having on the ground. So we did from that perspective, but those were specific interventions to fix problems that had cropped up. When the farmers came, who were going to supply the industry met, we said we will give them a tax concession, which they actually never got, the farmers in that area, because we said if the banks made loans to them, we are going to make those loans, the proceeds from those loans, tax-free to the banks. So then the banks can give them longer-term capital at low interest rates. So then the government didn't have to invest in supplying cane to the factory. We still need to pursue some of those things. So those were lots of promises that we made that would have seen the industry.